Hello, welcome to Queensland Economy Watch, the week that was. It's the 2nd of February. I'm Gene Tunney. Before we begin, I'd just like to say my thoughts and prayers are with the people of Townsville and North Queensland as they cope with the huge amount of rain and the flooding over recent days. My mother's cousin, Anne Marie, she's had to evacuate her unit in response to the risk of flooding, and I know there are lots of other people up there who've been badly affected, and so my thoughts are with them. Let's hope everything goes okay and we don't have anyone injured or killed up there. Okay, so let's begin with the economic news. Now this week we had a new optimistic report from Deloitte Access Economics. They're generally pretty optimistic about the economy, much more than I am, and this was welcomed by the Deputy Premier Treasurer Jackie Trad. She was very happy about it. So what did Deloitte have to say? So they noted that gas exports are leaping and Sydney's stupid housing prices are underpinning a resurgence in population gains above the national average. So state growth has recovered from tricky times. So they do make a good point about the pickup in net interstate migration, and that is something that we have covered on Queensland Economy Watch. The point that I would make, and it's a point that Ross Elliott has also made, in fact he may have made it before I did, the point is that even though in absolute terms it seems pretty strong, the net interstate migration, as a proportion of total population it's just nowhere near what it has been in some of those peaks in the past, and so you can see that from that chart I have on the screen at the moment. So positive news, but let's not get too excited. And just on the economic outlook for Queensland, I'm definitely not as optimistic as Deloitte, and regular blog readers will know why that is. And I think we'll need to wait until CCIQ release their pulse survey, the survey they do of the SMEs, their members with Suncorp. I understand that's going to be coming out soon, and I think that I expect that will somewhat they'll provide a different picture to what Deloitte's been painted. So let's wait and see what that brings. Okay, now one of the big pieces of news we've had recently, and within the last 24 hours, I believe, is US employment growth, relatively strong. So it's actually changed the market sentiment, it appears. So we had Jay Powell, we had the Federal Reserve chairman the other day saying that basically signalling that the US Fed wouldn't be raising interest rates anymore for a while, but now there's speculation that with this sort of employment growth that rates could actually increase some more. And we see, as in Australia, we see relatively strong growth in education and health services, professional services we see in the US. Now, in terms of percentage growth, it looks like it's mining and logging which is ahead. Now, I guess that's all mining, and that'll be because of the US shale oil boom. So that's grown. Shale oil it's grown very strongly over the last couple of years in the US. The big news in Australia, big economic news over the last week, was the CPI data, and probably no surprises there. Inflation remains low, and it's actually it remains below slightly below the RBA's target band of 2 to 3% per annum. So inflation expectations are well and truly anchored. You and what you'd take from that is you probably, interest rates are not likely to be going up anytime soon in Australia, and indeed there's speculation that if the housing prices continue to fall in Sydney and Melbourne, and if that has consequences for consumer spending, then perhaps the RBA could cut rates below where they are now. I'm reserving judgment on that one for the time being. I'd be surprised if that happens, but you never know. Okay, so that's the inflation data. Across Australia, things are pretty similar, except for in a few categories such as housing. So we've seen that Melbourne and Sydney, they had higher inflation in housing costs, so rents and cost of constructing a new house than in Brisbane, and that was associated with the property boom that they had. Of course, that's been coming off in the last 12 months or so. So that hasn't been as high. So I think we'll see some convergence there. Okay, education, we do see some variability there. Sydney has experienced much higher inflation in education costs, so obviously you have some very popular private schools down there, and they're able to charge high fees. Okay, so that's a summary of the major economic news. Next week, the big news items will be the release of that Royal Commission report, and one thing I'm going to be doing next week is a address to the Queensland Major Contractors Association, their breakfast at Victoria Park Function Centre on Friday morning, and I'll be talking about what's happening in the US, what's happening with US-China, what's happening with the China slowdown, where are we with Brexit, what's happening with state government infrastructure spending, what could they be getting out of the federal government. We did see our PM up here last week, I think it was, and he was promising some additional money for infrastructure. But I think the state government, it's very much looking forward to what's going to be, well, in my view, an inevitable change of government later this year, and I expect we'd see increased funding for some state government infrastructure projects, including Cross River Rail. Okay, so I'll be giving that talk on Friday. So if you're interested, you could Google it, look up the QM or look up the Queensland Major Contractors Association site, and you should be able to book via Eventbrite. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. I'd love to chat with you. Okay, thank you.